So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
This is actually an executive order designating the cartels and other organizations to be foreign terrorist organizations.
That's a big one.
Yes, sir.
That's a good one. Birthright. That's a big one.
Proclamation declaring a national emergency at the southern border of the United States.
That's a big one. A lot of big ones, huh?
This next one, sir, is a declaration of a national energy emergency.
So you also
That's a big one. You know what that allows you to do? That means you can do whatever you have to do to get out of that problem. And we do have that kind of an emergency. What is this one?
Withdrawing from the World Health Organization, sir.
Ooh, that's a big one.
U.S. President Donald Trump this week signing a flurry of executive orders, capping off his inauguration and kicking off the first official week of his second term. The president also continues to double, triple, quadruple down even on his comments about using, quote, economic force to annex Canada, floating his tariff threat as leverage, saying this week that if Canada became the 51st state, the U.S. wouldn't have to levy those stiff tariffs. Trump also continues to insist the U.S. does not need our cars, lumber, oil, or gas. Party leaders here at home, meanwhile, are pushing back. Take a listen.
These are our friends. And in Canada, we take care of our neighbors. We look out for one another. But do not take our kindness for weakness. We are ready to fight back. And I've said this before and I say it again. Donald Trump is a bully who understands one thing, that is strength. So we have to show strength and be ready to fight back.
President Trump is a deal maker. He wants to win. But we're both going to lose as Americans and Canadians if we get into a trade war. So what I would say is, how do we position the decision for him so that he understands that America can only win if it allows open, unbridled free trade with Canada.
President Trump said that he wants to usher in a golden age for the United States. That will require more steel and aluminum, more critical minerals, more reliable and affordable energy, more of everything to run the U.S. economy full steam ahead. Canada has all those resources.
So how has Trump changed the playing field in just the first 6 days of his presidency, and will dealing with the president become the ballot box issue here in Canada? Our Sunday strategy session is with us to talk about that. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Kory Teneycke is Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Kory, I'll start with you on the larger question of how has Trump kind of shaken up everything politically? How would you say he has?
Well, I think he's shaken everything up. I think you're bang on. I think the main reason being that he's threatened to bring in crippling tariffs on our economy. And in doing so would be putting at risk hundreds of thousands of jobs in the country and probably shaving a couple points off our GDP. We'd be in a deep recession. So I think should that come to pass, it will become the only issue that we're talking about. I don't think we're quite there yet, though. I think affordability, carbon taxes, all those other things are still, floating around out in voter land. Because we haven't actually seen the tariffs come in yet, and not surprisingly, I think most voters have a very vague understanding of what tariffs mean and how that would impact them. But I think they may be getting a rather harsh and sudden education in the matter, about a week from now.
Scott, in the Canadian context, tariffs are, as Kory points out, the name of the game, but more widely, I mean, there's so much stuff that Trump did so quickly. Like, there was nothing incremental about the beginning of his presidency, from withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord to withdrawing from the WHO, a whole host of executive orders that will undo policy that's been in place for the last 4 years. What kind of an impact more widely do you think that's having?
Well, a huge one, and it is reshaping and rewiring our political discussion completely, and not just among the politicians. You know, go to a coffee shop, go to a bar, go to your grocery store. It's all that people are talking about, real people. And, the thing about Trump is, and we've been so reminded this week of it, and we knew it, but man, you could just feel it now. He is like a giant hailstorm. When he's around, it eclipses everything else. He blots everything else from the sky, and he just hammers and hammers and hammers away. So whether it's talking about tariffs, tariffs, where he's talking about 51st state, where he's talking about taking back the Panama Canal, doubling, more than doubling the NATO dues to 5%. It's just a steady fire hose, a steady stream of conversation from the guy, forces everyone to react. And as that happens, we're thinking less and less about Justin Trudeau starting to move into the rear view window. We're starting to think less and less about carbon tax. It feels like the only logical discussion around which the next election will revolve is how do we deal with Trump and who should be dealing with Trump?
Yeah, it's a weird sense of deja vu as Scott is spelling that out, Kathleen, and I felt it all this week compared to when he was first elected, where it's like, you know that there's a lot of stuff that previously when he didn't hold power you could dismiss, but the second he becomes the president of the United States, it's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And it's difficult, for people to say to ignore it. Like, you can't. What he says matters vis-a-vis the position he holds.
Yeah, and he's imploring one of the other tactics that his former advisor Stephen Bannon used to do, which is to kind of flood the zone with so much information. So it's not just tariffs, but as Scott mentions, now he wants to escalate the cost of getting into NATO by 5%. So it's all of these things that are impacting, and it's like he's like, Trump is a one-man pandemic that is infecting all of Canadian politics at every level, at the provincial level, at the municipal level. We're hearing mayors speak out about Trump and his tariffs, and also obviously at the federal level. But I think it's really eclipsing Poilievre's chance to get the kind of earned media that we've seen in the past, right? We've seen Justin Trudeau take a step back. The Liberal leadership is really not mainstream news so far. It is for the political class, but not normal folk.
I love how both you and Scott have referenced normal people as though we are not, but just anyway,
but I know
continue.
Normal people. That's the difference between me and Scott. Scott doesn't know
Speak
anyone
for
normal.
yourselves. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'll freely admit I'm not normal. It's fine. I'm okay with it.
But you can't actually escape him in the news, Trump in the news these days. So anyone who's even tangentially paying attention on the street, wherever you are, they're hearing about this, and that is the driver of most people's political anxiety right now.
So let's talk about that ballot box question. We tweaked the intro to this segment, Kory, because it used to say you were the campaign manager for Ontario Premier Doug Ford. You now are, right? Because the election is going to be called this week. Is that your view, that this will be the ballot box question? Maybe the better question is that your hope?
I think it is, as I said earlier, I think it is a partial ballot box question right now, because I think affordability is still very much a huge issue out there. And the two are related, but we're going to go from people worrying about the price of eggs and the price of gas and whether we should have a carbon tax to worrying about how they can afford anything if they're laid off and trying to meet their bills on an EI payment as opposed to a paycheck. So I think the size of the threat has gone up, but it's taken, I think, existing things that were driving politics, and it's turned them from like a 7 out of 10 to the full volume here, a full 10 out of 10, maybe even a 12 out of 10, or has the potential to. Should we face tariffs on the 1st of February, as the president is promising?
On the federal level, Scott, and you referenced this already, but to what degree? I mean, how much of it is contingent on when/if the tariffs come, when/if the election happens? Like, there are, I think, some, sort of X factors in all of this. But right now, it feels like the conversation is a lot different than it was 2 months ago.
Yeah, no question. And obviously the actual application of tariffs will really intensify the focus. And, I really want to highlight something Kory said, because to me it is going to shape the next election federally. And that's the word jobs. And when we've been going through tough economic times, it's been an affordability crisis. By and large, people haven't worried about whether or not they're losing their jobs. These tariffs will strike a different kind of economic terror in people's hearts. It will be really the genuine fear that maybe my job will disappear, or maybe my job has disappeared. So that's going to completely reshape this next federal election. The core question, I think, for the Conservatives, they've lost the carbon tax election. That's not going to happen. But it doesn't necessarily, all of this change doesn't really necessarily benefit the Liberals. The question is it still going to be a change election? Is it still going to be about booting out this government? And you're very reluctant, if you're folks like us, to say that that is no longer going to be the case. But Trump, again, dominates so much. You can't help but think that when this election rolls around, say it's in May, won't that be the issue? Only Trump and Trump only. So I do think it raises some challenges for Pierre Poilievre.
Kathleen, what are your thoughts on that? I think that it is interesting to see the way that the conversation has changed. I'm hesitant yet to proclaim that the change question is off the table, only because we're still looking at who wins the leadership race. I thought there was an interesting question to Mark Carney about how he's positioned himself as an outsider, yet he has the entire, majority of the Liberal establishment behind him. So I feel like that is TBD, but it's certainly something to consider.
But just look how remarkable it has been. Like 4 months ago, everyone would have said changes on the ballot, Justin Trudeau is on the ballot, carbon tax is on the ballot. Those things seem to be falling off. And if you have to weigh it between carbon tax or Trump, right now Trump is trumping the ballot box question for sure. But I think that it's not too late for any campaign, whether it's the Conservative campaign, New Democrats, or Liberals, to recalibrate. So they can change, but clearly carbon tax is moving into the rearview mirror. And so, what I'm interested in following right now is how the Conservatives try to adapt. We've seen just in this past week the Conservative leader really being drowned out in mainstream media. He's trying to do more media interviews, more than he's done recently. Trois Rivières, he's done some in Toronto, CP24, trying to get out there and punch through. But basically, Trump is eating up all the media oxygen. So how do you do that in this environment and still maintain? Sure, you can buy your way through paid ads. You can continue getting into people's feeds. But if you can't shape the conversation and keep it on carbon tax, it moves somewhere else. And it is going to move, like we've all said, to jobs, to the economy, to people's very sovereignty of our country.
Okay, I got to leave it there. Thanks, everyone. This conversation will go on for a while longer. Kory, Teneycke, Scott Reid, and Kathleen Monk, our Sunday strategy session. Speaking of that Liberal leadership race, the candidates are attempting to distance themselves from Justin Trudeau and his policies, more to the point. As the race gets started in earnest, the top contenders try to position themselves away from things like capital gains and the consumer carbon tax. We're going to talk more about that after a short break. Stay right there.
I'm forced to recognize that largely due to Pierre Poilievre's campaign to frankly lie and misguide Canadians, it has become very unpopular.